The billionaire's breath rattled like broken glass, yet his voice cut through the silence with one last shocking request: "Bring me the maid." And in that moment, everything everyone thought they knew about him shattered. The night was heavy with the kind of silence that makes even clocks hesitate. Inside the Grand Whitmore estate, a mansion sprawled across rolling hills and guarded by iron gates, the air felt like a mausoleum. The man who had built empires, purchased governments, and reshaped skylines now lay in a room too vast for a dying body, swallowed by silken sheets and the low hum of medical machines. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Richard Whitmore, once the titan of industry, looked smaller than he ever had. His face, carved with lines of power and pride, was now pale, translucent almost, as though life itself were ashamed to remain. Around him, doctors whispered, lawyers lingered with papers, and family members hovered with practiced concern. But Richard barely looked at them. His eyes, sharp even in weakness, seemed to stare past them all, searching for someone who wasn't there. His children were there, of course: Julian, the ambitious son who had always wanted his father's approval but settled for his inheritance; Clara, elegant and polished, her hand heavy with diamonds but her smile hollow. They sat close enough to be noticed, but far enough to keep their grief from wrinkling their clothes. "Father," Julian said, clearing his throat, "if there's anything important you want to settle, now would be the time." Richard turned his head slowly, his lips curling into a faint, humorless smile. "Important," he rasped. "And yet you think of money." Julian stiffened, but before he could retort, Richard's hand lifted weakly, silencing the room. His eyes, fever-bright, scanned the faces before him, none of them what he wanted. "Bring me," he coughed, a violent shake rattling his chest. "Bring me the maid." The room froze. Clara blinked, confused. Julian's brows furrowed. Even the doctors glanced at each other. "The maid?" Clara asked carefully, as though testing if delirium had taken him. "Do you mean one of the staff?" Richard's eyes, still sharp, cut into her. "Not staff," he growled weakly. "Her." Miles away, in a modest apartment tucked in a part of the city that billionaires never set foot in, Evelyn Carter stirred awake at the knock on her door. She was 53 now, her body worn from years of scrubbing floors and polishing silver. Her hands were calloused, her back often ached, but her spirit remained unbowed. She lived quietly, working at a local church kitchen, never asking for more than peace. She hadn't set foot in the Whitmore estate in almost 25 years. To her, that chapter of her life felt buried, wrapped in memory and a touch of bitterness. She remembered the echo of her footsteps on marble floors, the way her uniform always felt like armor against the cold stares of guests, and the occasional moments, strange, fleeting, when Richard Whitmore himself would pause long enough to notice her existence. The knock grew louder. With a sigh, Evelyn opened the door to find a man in a tailored suit, his expression clipped and professional. "Ms. Carter?" he asked. "Yes," she said slowly, her voice steady but wary. "I've been sent by Mr. Richard Whitmore. He is gravely ill." His last request, the man hesitated, as though even he didn't quite believe the words, "is to see you." Evelyn's heart thudded. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. Of all the things she had expected to hear that evening, this was not one. "Mr. Whitmore," she repeated, almost scoffing. "That man hasn't thought of me in decades." "Be that as it may," the man said, his tone tight, "he insists. He won't see anyone else until you arrive." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, battling the storm inside her. Why now? Why her? A swirl of resentment and curiosity warred within. She thought of the years she had given, her dignity sometimes bruised, her labor unseen. And now, on his deathbed, he wanted her? She opened her eyes, exhaling slowly. "Tell him," she said at last, "I'll come." Back at the estate, Richard's children were in an uproar. "Father, this is absurd," Julian snapped. "You're wasting precious time summoning some maid from decades ago." Richard turned his gaze on him, a slow fire burning beneath the frailty. "You don't understand. You've never understood. What could a maid possibly mean to you?" Clara pressed, her voice tight with both curiosity and resentment. But Richard didn't answer. His chest heaved, his eyes drifting to the window, as though in the darkness outside he could already see her face approaching. "If you were Evelyn, would you go to the bedside of the man who once employed you after decades of silence? Or would you refuse? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts." The drive up to the Whitmore estate felt like trespassing into a past Evelyn had worked hard to forget. The car that picked her up glided through winding streets lined with oak trees, each branch arching like a cathedral ceiling. She remembered the route, though her life had since been lived far from such marble and grandeur. Her fingers toyed nervously with the hem of her faded cardigan, and she wondered why she hadn't insisted on turning the car around. When the iron gates opened and the mansion came into view, Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. It was just as she remembered, grand, intimidating, dripping with the wealth that had always seemed to sneer at her presence. She recalled the days she used to arrive in her crisp Maid uniform, walking through those same gates with her head down, determined not to be noticed, and yet secretly wishing she could be. Now she was being escorted up the driveway like a guest of honor. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with both money and mourning. The staff, few of them familiar, cast curious glances as she walked past. Julian and Clara were waiting near the grand staircase, their faces set in masks of polite disdain. "You must be Evelyn," Clara said, her tone laced with surprise and judgment all at once. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "Yes. He asked for me." Julian's lips curled faintly. "We'll see what that's about." They led her down the long corridor toward Richard's room. Evelyn's steps slowed as they approached, her heart hammering in her chest. She had imagined this moment in countless ways, sometimes with anger, sometimes with sorrow, but never like this, never with his life flickering out like a candle. The door opened. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with expensive cologne. The curtains were drawn, but a single lamp cast a warm glow over the massive bed where Richard Whitmore lay propped up, thinner than she remembered, his once commanding presence diminished. When his eyes met hers, however, something flickered to life. "Evelyn," he rasped, and for a moment his voice sounded stronger than it had in weeks. Her throat tightened. She hadn't expected him to recognize her so quickly, so clearly. She stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Whitmore." The corners of his mouth twitched, forming what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted. He chuckled, a dry, broken sound. "Still stubborn." His eyes glistened. "Good." Behind them, Julian shifted impatiently. "Father, really? Why drag her here?" Richard's hand lifted weakly from the covers, trembling as it gestured toward the door. "Leave us." Clara frowned. "But father—" "Leave," Richard said again, his voice sharp despite its weakness. With exchanged looks of irritation, his children retreated, the door clicking shut behind them. Suddenly, the room felt both too large and too intimate, filled with decades of unspoken words. Evelyn stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "So," she said quietly, "this is what you called me for. After all these years." Richard's chest rose and fell, his eyes never leaving hers. "I had to see you, before it's over." "Why?" The word cracked out of her, sharper than she intended. "Why me?" He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering what little strength remained. "Because you were the only one who ever saw me." The words hit her like a stone thrown into still water, rippling through her. She blinked, unsure whether to feel anger, disbelief, or something else entirely. "Saw you? Richard, you were the most powerful man in every room. Everyone saw you." His eyes opened, piercing despite the haze of illness. They saw the billionaire, the tycoon, the Whitmore name, not the man. You saw the man. Do you remember the garden?" Evelyn froze. Memories pressed in, quiet afternoons when she'd been sent to trim flowers in the garden, and he'd sometimes wander out, away from his meetings and family drama. She remembered once catching him sitting alone on a stone bench, his face buried in his hands. She hadn't meant to disturb him, but he'd spoken first, and for a brief moment they had talked, not as master and maid, but as two tired souls. Her lips trembled. That was a lifetime ago. "For me," Richard whispered, "it was yesterday." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, and she hated that they did. She had come armored with resentment, but now the cracks were showing. "You don't know what it was like," she said, her voice shaking. "Working here. Always invisible. Always beneath notice. I told myself I was just a shadow in this house. You were never a shadow, Richard said firmly, his frail hand clutching at the sheets. You were the light in it. The room fell silent, heavy with emotion neither of them knew how to name. Finally, Evelyn took a step closer, her heart pounding. And what am I supposed to do with that, Richard? After all this time? His eyes softened, his voice a fragile whisper. Forgive me. The words hung in the air, trembling, fragile, almost unbearable. Evelyn's breath caught, her chest tightening as she stared at the man who had once seemed untouchable, now begging her for something no money could buy. She didn't answer. Not yet. The silence stretched, a battlefield of unspoken memories and pain. Outside the door, Julian and Clara whispered furiously, trying to piece together why their father had chosen this woman over them. Inside, Evelyn and Richard stood on the edge of something neither of them could fully step into yet. But for the first time in decades, they were truly seen. Do you believe people can truly change at the end of their lives? If someone who once hurt you asked for forgiveness with their last breath, would you give it or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments. Evelyn didn't move. Her arms were folded across her chest again, the way one shields themselves from cold air. Richard's plea for forgiveness hung in the room like smoke, seeping into her lungs whether she wanted it or not. Forgive you, she repeated, her voice low, trembling with both anger and disbelief. Do you even remember the things you let happen in this house? The way your children looked at me? The way your guests treated me like furniture? You never stopped them. You never spoke up. You let me fade into the wallpaper. Richard's eyelids fluttered shut, pain carving itself into the corners of his face. I remember more than you think. And every memory has eaten at me. Convenient, Evelyn shot back. Now that you're dying, the guilt finally matters. The words cut deep, and for a moment, Richard seemed to shrink even further into the pillows. His hand trembled as he reached out, but Evelyn did not take it. Outside the door, Julian pressed his ear close. Clara crossed her arms, irritation etched across her features. This is absurd, Julian muttered. Father is delirious. That woman, she doesn't belong here. She's filling his head with nonsense. Clara's brow furrowed. But he asked for her. He hasn't asked for anyone else. Don't you find that strange? Julian scowled. I find it insulting. Inside, Evelyn paced near the window, refusing to look at Richard. Do you know what it was like when I left this place? I promised myself I'd never come back. That I'd never be small again. And now here I am, standing in the same house, looking at the same man, only weaker, more broken. Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her emotions. She clenched her fists. Richard forced his eyes open, watching her with the quiet desperation of a man running out of time. Evelyn, I can't change the past. I can't undo the mistakes. But I can tell you, you were the one good thing I didn't deserve. Her breath hitched, and she spun toward him, fury and grief clashing on her face. Don't you dare put that on me. Don't you dare make me carry your redemption. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor beside his bed. Richard's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but his gaze never wavered. I'm not asking you to carry me, he whispered. I'm asking you to free yourself. Because whether you believe it or not, you matter to me. More than anyone else in this house. Evelyn's eyes burned, tears she didn't want betraying her resolve. She turned away again, clutching the edge of the curtain as if it could steady her. The door burst open. Julian strode in, Clara trailing behind. That's enough, Julian snapped, his voice hard. Father, you are delirious. This woman doesn't belong here. Whatever this charade is, it ends now. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She turned, her posture regal despite the ache in her heart. I didn't come here for your approval. Julian sneered. You came here for something. Money? Recognition? Don't think we don't see through it. Richard's voice rose, sharp despite its weakness. Stop. Julian froze. Richard's hand trembled as he pointed at him. Do not speak to her that way. The silence that followed was thunderous. Evelyn stared at him, stunned. Never once in her years of working here had he defended her like that. Not against the whispers of guests. Not against the coldness of family. And now, in his frailty, he did. Clara's eyes flickered between them, her expression unreadable. "Father," Julian tried again, softer now, "you're not yourself. Please, rest. Don't let memories confuse you." But Richard only shook his head, each motion labored. "For once in my life, Julian, I am myself. And you would do well to listen." Julian's jaw worked furiously, but he said nothing more. Clara touched his arm gently. "Come. Let him be." The siblings retreated, their whispers echoing down the hallway. Evelyn remained by the window, her chest tight, her mind a storm. "You defended me," she said at last, her voice raw. "Why now?" Richard's eyes softened, almost breaking. "Because I should have done it then. And because I don't want to die leaving you with nothing but silence." Evelyn's hands trembled. She turned back to him, her expression conflicted. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I want to." "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Just don't walk away yet." Her breath caught. Something in his tone, in the way he looked at her, not as a maid, not as a servant, but as the only person who mattered in his final hours, stirred something she thought she had buried. But still, she resisted. She sat in the chair by his bed, arms crossed, heart pounding. "I'll stay," she said finally. "But don't mistake it for forgiveness." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn, to the very end." "If you were in Evelyn's shoes, would you sit and listen, or would you walk out of that room for good? What would your heart tell you? Leave your thoughts below. I want to hear your side." The storm began without warning. Rain lashed against the Whitmore estate's tall windows, and thunder rolled like drums in the heavens. Evelyn glanced outside and shook her head. Leaving tonight would be impossible. The roads to the city flooded easily, and no driver would risk them. When Clara entered the room later, she delivered the news with tight lips. "The storm has washed out the main road. You'll have to stay until morning." Evelyn bristled. "I'll manage. I don't belong here." Clara's smile was icy. "No, you don't. But Father insists you stay. We've prepared a guest room. Try not to get lost in the house." Her heels clicked sharply as she left, the door closing behind her. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her body taut with tension. Trapped. That was how it felt. She had sworn never to cross this threshold again, and now circumstances chained her here. From the bed, Richard's eyes followed her. "I'm glad you're staying." She turned on him sharply. "Don't mistake this for my choice." "I know," he whispered. "But sometimes the choices we don't make lead us where we need to be." Evelyn frowned, but the exhaustion in his face pulled at her in ways she wished it wouldn't. She pulled the chair closer and sat, arms folded tightly. "Then talk, Richard. Whatever it is you wanted to say to me, say it." For a long while, he said nothing. The storm outside filled the silence with its roar, lightning flashing through the curtains. Evelyn almost thought he had fallen asleep when his voice broke through, thin but steady. "Do you remember the night my wife left?" Evelyn stiffened. She remembered. Not in detail, but she recalled the atmosphere in the house that night. Tension like a taut wire, whispers in the hallways, slammed doors. She remembered finding Richard in the library hours later, staring into a glass of scotch as if it might reveal the future. "You were the only one who asked me if I was all right," he said softly. "Everyone else pretended nothing was wrong. You saw through me." Evelyn's chest tightened. She hadn't thought much of that moment back then. She had simply been a woman doing her job, offering kindness because no one else had. But hearing him recall it now, decades later, made her realize how much it had meant. "You were my maid," he continued, "but you were also my confessor. My anchor when I was drowning. I never told you that. And I should have." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Richard, you had wealth, power, children, everything people dream of. Don't you dare tell me I was your anchor. That makes no sense." His lips twitched into a faint smile. "Perhaps that's why it's true." Hours passed. The storm didn't relent. Richard drifted in and out of sleep, his breathing uneven. Evelyn sat by the bed, her own thoughts restless. Memories flooded her, the endless chores, the cold stares of guests, but also the rare moments when Richard had softened. A time he had lingered in the kitchen, complimenting her cornbread though his family had sneered at simple food. A moment in the garden when he had listened, truly listened, to her story about her grandmother's wisdom. The night she had caught him staring at the stars like a man searching for something he couldn't name. Back then, she had dismissed those moments. Now, they returned with a weight she couldn't ignore. When he stirred awake again, his voice was weaker. "Evelyn." She leaned forward, wary. "Yes." "Stay," he whispered. His eyes, though clouded with pain, held a plea she couldn't turn from. "I'm here," she said quietly. "Not just now," he rasped. "Stay, until the end." Her breath caught. She stared at him, heart hammering. The request was too much, too intimate. And yet, looking at him, frail and vulnerable, she couldn't find it in herself to refuse outright. "We'll see," she said softly, her tone cautious but not rejecting. Richard's eyes closed, relief washing over his face as he drifted back into sleep. Later that night, Evelyn slipped out into the hallway, needing air. She wandered through the mansion, past gilded mirrors and portraits of Whitmore ancestors staring down with cold, painted eyes. In the grand dining hall she paused, remembering how she used to stand at the edges, silent and invisible, while laughter and crystal filled the room. "You're still here." The voice made her turn. Clara stood in the doorway, her posture elegant but her eyes sharp. "Yes," Evelyn replied evenly. "Don't think for a second this changes anything," Clara said coolly. "You're not family. You don't belong in his will, in his memories, or in this house." Evelyn straightened, her voice firm. "I never asked for any of that. I came because he asked. That's all." Clara studied her for a long moment, then gave a dismissive nod. "Good. Keep it that way." Evelyn held her gaze, unflinching, until Clara walked away. Only when she was alone again did Evelyn let her shoulders sag. She returned to Richard's room, where he slept fitfully. Sitting back down beside him, she realized with startling clarity. She was bound here, not just by the storm, but by unfinished business between them. For better or worse, she could not leave. Not yet. Have you ever found yourself forced to stay in a situation you swore you'd never return to, only to realize it was exactly where you needed to be? Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to know. The storm had passed by morning, but the air in the Whitmore estate remained heavy, thick with something unspoken. Evelyn sat by Richard's bedside, staring at the pale light filtering through the curtains. He hadn't woken all night, his breath shallow but steady. When he stirred at last, she leaned forward. His voice was raspy, barely audible. "There are things I never told you, Evelyn. Things I should have said years ago." Her chest tightened. "Richard, you don't have to." "I do," he cut her off, surprising her with sudden strength in his tone. "I can't leave this world with the weight of silence on my soul." He motioned weakly toward the nightstand, where a leather-bound journal rested. Evelyn hesitated before handing it to him. His trembling hands opened it, revealing pages filled with slanted handwriting, some ink smudged with time. "These are my confessions," he whispered. "The truth of my life. But some truths can't be left on paper, they must be spoken." He closed the book and looked at her, his eyes searching. "Do you know why I asked for you, Evelyn?" She shook her head slowly. "Because you were the only person who ever looked at me without wanting something in return. Not money. Not influence. Just me. You saw the man, not the fortune." Her breath caught. "Richard, I was your maid. That's all." "No," he said firmly. "You were far more. You were my compass when I was lost. And the truth is," he paused, his chest heaving, eyes glistening, "I loved you." The words struck her like lightning. Evelyn froze, her pulse roaring in her ears. "You what?" "I loved you," he repeated, each word weighted with decades of silence. "From the moment you stood up to my father in that kitchen, refusing to let him speak down to you. From the day you carried dignity in a house that tried to strip it from you. I never admitted it, not even to myself fully. But you were the light in this cold house." Evelyn's throat closed, her eyes burning. Anger, disbelief, and a hidden ache long buried all rose at once. "You loved me," she whispered, trembling. "Is that what you call it? Standing by while your wife mocked me? While your children treated me like dirt? While I worked myself raw in your service?" Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Do you know what it was like, Richard? To be invisible in the house where I gave my youth? To be treated like nothing, by people who never knew hunger, never knew the weight of scrubbing floors until your hands bled. Richard closed his eyes, pain etching his face deeper than illness ever could. Yes, he whispered. I knew. And it haunts me. I was a coward. I loved you, but I hid it behind silence. I let the world dictate my choices. I hurt you with my inaction. Evelyn rose from the chair, pacing the room, hands shaking. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw the truth back in his face. Another part wanted to collapse, to let the years of buried feelings wash over her. Why now? She demanded, voice raw. Why wait until your last breath to say this? Because, he rasped, struggling for air, death strips away pride. I have nothing left but honesty. And before I go, you deserve to know, you were loved. Deeply. Truly. Even if I was too weak to show it. His words hung in the air, thick and trembling. Evelyn pressed her hands against her face, sobbing quietly. For years, she had wondered if the small glances, the fleeting tenderness she thought she imagined, had meant anything. Now she knows. And the knowledge hurt as much as it healed. After a long silence, Richard spoke again, voice faint. There's more. Evelyn lowered her hands, wary. What more could there be? He swallowed, eyes glistening. Do you remember the summer my daughter turned 18? When you left suddenly? Her heart stilled. That summer, the one she never spoke of. The one that had left scars she carried to this day. Yes, she said softly, voice barely audible. I knew why you left, Richard whispered. I found the letter you never meant for me to see. The one where you said you couldn't bear the way the family treated you. Where you said you were carrying a secret. Evelyn's breath hitched. Her body trembled. He knew. Richard's eyes searched hers. Tell me, Evelyn. After all these years, was it true? Did you carry my child? The room seemed to collapse in silence, the question ringing louder than the thunder from the night before. Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came. The truth pressed against her chest like a dam waiting to break. She turned away, tears streaming down her cheeks, her body shaking. She couldn't speak. Not yet. Richard closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his weathered cheek. Even if you don't answer, I want you to know, I would have chosen differently, if I had been braver. I would have chosen you. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart shattering with every word. The past had returned, demanding to be faced. And for the first time in decades, she realized the choice wasn't his anymore. It was hers. The morning light slanted through the curtains, bathing the room in a pale gold that felt almost merciful after the storm of truth. Evelyn sat silently at Richard's bedside, her hands clenched in her lap, her chest still heaving from the revelations of the night before. Richard's eyes fluttered open, weak but clearer than she had seen in days. He turned his head slightly toward her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I thought you'd be gone, he whispered. Evelyn shook her head. I should have been. But I'm still here. Her voice carried both steel and softness, a contradiction that mirrored the storm inside her. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not the same as before. It was charged, heavy, yet oddly tender. Evelyn reached for a cloth to dab his forehead, her hand surprisingly steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Evelyn, he said softly, I don't deserve your care. Not after everything. But I need you to know, I'm grateful. She looked down at him, her lips trembling. Do you want to know the truth about that summer? Richard's breath caught. His hand, frail and veined, reached for hers. She let him hold it. Yes, he whispered. Please. Her eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to speak. I was carrying your child. For a few months, I thought, maybe it would change everything. Maybe it was the reason God put me in your life. But then, I lost the baby. Alone. Quietly. No one ever knew. Not your family. Not you. I buried that part of myself because I couldn't bear the weight of their cruelty if they had found out. Her voice cracked, her body shaking. Richard squeezed her hand as tears streamed down his own face. Evelyn, he rasped, his voice breaking. I should have been there. I should have fought for you. You weren't, she whispered bitterly. You chose silence. I did, he admitted, raw and unflinching. And I will regret it until my last breath. But please believe me when I say, you and that child, you were never forgotten. Not for a single day. Something inside Evelyn broke open then, not anger, not bitterness, but a weary kind of release. She leaned forward, her forehead resting lightly against his frail hand. I wanted to hate you, she confessed. For years, I told myself you were just another Whitmore, just another man who used silence as a weapon. But deep down, I couldn't. Because part of me knew you saw me, even when the world didn't. And I. Her words caught. For the first time, she admitted aloud what she had buried for decades. I loved you too, Richard. I always did. And I hated myself for it. His breath trembled, his eyes closing as if her words were a bomb. Say it again, he whispered. She hesitated, her body trembling, before finally whispering, I loved you. For the first time in decades, they shared something raw and unshackled. Evelyn sat with him in silence, her fingers tracing absent patterns across his hand. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though time itself had bent, giving them back what had been stolen. Do you believe, Richard murmured, that we can find forgiveness at the end? That God grants it, even if men do not. Evelyn's eyes filled again. I don't know. But maybe forgiveness isn't given, it's chosen. And maybe I'm choosing it now. They sat together in that fragile truce, their words soft but piercing, their silences louder than thunder. The weight of decades lifted slightly, replaced by something gentler. Richard chuckled weakly, breaking the heaviness. Do you remember the peach tree in the garden? Evelyn blinked at the sudden shift. The one your mother hated because it ruined her view? Yes, he smiled faintly. You used to sneak out there during your breaks. I'd watch you eat the peaches as if you were tasting freedom itself. A small laugh broke from Evelyn's lips despite herself. You saw that. Every time, he whispered. I used to wish I could join you. But I never did. She shook her head, smiling through tears. You were a coward. He chuckled again, wheezing. Yes. The greatest coward. But you made that tree holy. You made everything holy, Evelyn. For the first time since she returned, Evelyn laughed freely. It wasn't loud, it was trembling, shaky, almost painful, but it was real. Richard smiled faintly at the sound, closing his eyes as if it were music. Don't stop, he whispered. I want that to be my last memory, your laugh. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded. Then I'll laugh again. She told him small stories, fragments of the life she had built after leaving the Whitmores, the children in her church choir, the neighbors who called her Mama Evelyn, the way she grew her own garden of peaches as a reminder that life could still be sweet. Richard listened, his eyes glistening, his fingers clutching hers like a lifeline. For once, he didn't look like a billionaire, or a man weighed by regrets. He looked simply human, and she saw the boy he must have been before wealth, pride, and silence hardened him. As dusk fell, Evelyn adjusted his blanket and smoothed his hair with the gentleness of someone who had long ago sworn never to care for him again. Yet here she was, holding vigil over the man who had broken and cherished her all at once. Richard, she whispered softly, almost to herself. We were too late. He opened his eyes, weak but resolute. No, Evelyn. We are right on time. Her breath caught as his frail fingers brushed against hers. And in that fragile moment, she realized he was right. Love, however delayed, had finally been spoken aloud. Do you think love still matters even if it comes too late, or is the timing as important as the love itself? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. The house had grown too quiet. Evelyn had grown used to the soft rhythm of Richard's breathing, the whisper of his frail voice, the way their silences now carried warmth instead of coldness. But the peace shattered when the door burst open without warning. His children had arrived. Catherine and James stormed into the room, their faces flushed with fury and indignation. Behind them trailed a lawyer in a crisp suit, his expression neutral but his presence sharp as a blade. What is she doing here? Catherine hissed, her eyes locking on Evelyn with venom. This is outrageous. Evelyn rose slowly, her body trembling but her spine straight. She said nothing. Richard stirred, startled by the intrusion. Catherine. James. "Father," James snapped, his voice clipped. "You're unwell. You should be resting. Why is the maid sitting by your side?" Evelyn's chest tightened at the word, the maid. After all these years, after all she had given and endured, that's all she remained to them. "She's here," Richard said, his voice weak but firm, "because I asked her to be." "You asked her?" Catherine scoffed, turning to the lawyer. "You see? He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying." "I am not confused." Richard's voice rose with a strength that surprised even himself. He coughed violently, his frail body shaking. Evelyn rushed to steady him, but James stepped forward, blocking her. "Don't touch him." James barked. "Haven't you done enough, hanging around here like a vulture?" Evelyn froze, her heart pounding. The insult stung, not because it was unexpected, but because it was too familiar, the same cruelty she had endured decades before. "Enough." Richard's voice cracked through the tension. "You will not speak to her that way." Catherine's jaw dropped. "You're defending her? Her? She was a servant, Father. She's nothing to us. Nothing to this family." Richard's eyes blazed, a fire Evelyn had thought long extinguished. "She is everything you are not. She is dignity. She is honesty. She is love. And I," his voice broke, his body trembling, "I loved her. I still do." The room fell into stunned silence. Catherine staggered back, clutching her pearls as if his confession had struck her physically. James's face twisted with rage. "You loved her." James spat, glaring at Evelyn. This is disgusting. You're humiliating Mother's memory." Evelyn's stomach turned. She wanted to defend herself, to shout the truth of all she had endured, but Richard's frailty anchored her silence. "She doesn't belong here," Catherine hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Evelyn. "And if you're too weak to see that, then we'll handle it. This," she gestured at the lawyer, "is here to protect the estate. We won't let some maid manipulate you on your deathbed." The lawyer cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Whitmore, I've been asked to review certain documents. To ensure your wishes are clear." Richard's face paled, but his eyes didn't waver. "Then listen closely. My wish is for Evelyn to stay. To be here when I go. And if you deny her that, you deny me my peace." "Father." James thundered. "You can't mean that. She's tricking you." Evelyn couldn't take it anymore. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't want his money. I never wanted his money. I don't care about your estate, or your inheritance, or any of the trappings you cling to like gods. I came here because he called for me. Because," her voice cracked, "because once, long ago, he saw me when no one else did." Tears burned her eyes, but she held their gaze without faltering. "If you can't accept that, then that's your burden. Not mine." Richard's chest heaved, his strength slipping away as his children's outrage filled the room. "Get out," he rasped, his voice thin but sharp. "What?" Catherine's mouth dropped open. "I said get out," Richard repeated. "If you cannot honor the one person who truly cared for me, then you have no right to be here." The words hung heavy in the air. Catherine turned on her heel, storming out with a furious sob. James lingered, his fists clenched, his eyes darting between his father and Evelyn. "This isn't over," he muttered, before stalking out with the lawyer in tow. The door slammed, leaving only silence behind. Evelyn sank into the chair, trembling. Richard lay back, pale and gasping for air. She reached for him instinctively, and for the first time, he did not resist. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I never meant for you to face this again. I thought, maybe if I spoke the truth, they would understand." Evelyn shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "You knew they wouldn't. You've always known." His lips trembled. "And still, I had to choose you, even if it cost me them." Her heart broke anew, the weight of his words crushing her. This was the shatter point, the collision of love and consequence, truth and legacy. For a moment, Evelyn felt as though the fragile bond they had built would collapse beneath the weight of hatred and misunderstanding. She pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "Richard, I can't," her voice broke. "I can't do this. Not with them watching, not with their hatred hanging over us like a curse. His eyes widened with panic. Evelyn, please. But she was already at the door, her body trembling, her soul unraveling. I need time, she whispered, and then she was gone, leaving Richard alone, the sound of her footsteps echoing like finality down the hallway. Do you think Evelyn should have stayed by Richard's side no matter what, or was she right to step away when the family's hatred became too much? Share your take in the comments. The night pressed down heavy on the Whitmore estate, thick with silence after the storm of confrontation. Evelyn sat alone in the guest room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks streaked with the evidence of tears she hadn't meant to shed. Her mind was a battlefield. The words of Catherine and James echoed cruelly, Maid, vulture, nothing to this family. She had heard them before years ago, but this time they pierced deeper because Richard had finally stood beside her, and yet, it still wasn't enough to silence the venom. She gripped the edge of the vanity until her knuckles whitened. Why did I come back? Why did I let myself hope again? And yet, another voice whispered inside her, because you loved him. Because some part of you always did. Meanwhile, Richard lay in his darkened bedroom, the air machine humming softly at his side. His children's anger still rang in his ears, but louder still was the sound of Evelyn's footsteps leaving. He felt the weight of finality pressing against his chest. He had chosen her at last, openly, defiantly, and she had walked away. Not because she didn't love him, but because she couldn't bear the cost. He turned his head toward the empty chair by his bed, where her presence had lingered for days. His chest ached, not just with illness, but with the crushing fear that he had lost her forever. I failed you again, he whispered into the dark. His hand trembled as he reached for the leather journal on the nightstand. But not this time. Not at the very end. With shaking hands, he began to scrawl a note, his breath shallow, each word costing him strength. Back in her room, Evelyn rose suddenly, pacing. She thought of the peaches in the garden, of the boy Richard once had been, of the confession she had waited decades to hear. She thought of the child she lost and the silence she endured. But she also thought of the laughter they had shared just hours ago, the way he whispered, "Say it again," like a man starved for truth. "Lord," she whispered aloud, "why now? Why give me this love only to rip it away at the end?" Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. But beneath the sobs was a flicker of something else, resolve. What if this was not too late? What if the cost was worth it, even if the time left was only days, hours, or moments? She pressed her palms to the floor, steadying herself. Pride had stolen too much already. Silence had stolen more. She would not let it steal the last chance at peace. At the same time, Richard placed the folded note on his pillow. His hand hovered over it, trembling. It was meant for her, in case she never returned. Words of apology, of love, of forgiveness. But as his eyes fluttered shut, he prayed for one thing only, that he would see her face once more before the end. Evelyn rose from the floor with trembling legs. Her body felt heavy, but her heart pulled her forward. She left the room, her steps echoing down the long hallways that had once been prisons of shame but now felt like a final pilgrimage. When she reached Richard's door, she paused, her hand hovering over the handle. Doubt gnawed at her. What if his children were inside? What if he no longer wanted her there? But then she heard his faint cough, the soft whisper of his name on the air as though calling only for her. She opened the door quietly. Richard stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he looked disoriented, until he saw her silhouette in the doorway. Relief swept over his face like dawn breaking after a storm. "You came back," he whispered, his voice raw. Evelyn crossed the room quickly, tears spilling freely now. She sank into the chair, grasping his hand with a desperation she hadn't allowed herself before. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I almost let their hatred chase me away again. But I realized I would regret that for the rest of my life. And I'm done living in regret." His hand tightened weakly around hers, his lips trembling into the faintest smile. "Evelyn, you saved me. Even now, at the end, you saved me." She shook her head, tears dripping onto his hand. "No, Richard. You saved me. You called me back to the truth I tried to bury. And I'm not walking away again." For a long moment, they simply held each other's gaze, the weight of decades falling away. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was full, alive, sacred. "Will you stay?" Richard asked softly. "Until the very end?" Evelyn pressed her forehead to his frail hand, her tears soaking into his skin. "Yes," she whispered. "Until the very end, and beyond." In the stillness of that night, both of them made their choice. Not pride. Not silence. Love. No matter how little time was left, they had chosen love. If you were in Evelyn's shoes, would you have gone back, or walked away to protect your heart? Comment below. I want to know what you would choose. The house was still when dawn arrived. The only sound in Richard's room was the steady hum of the machine at his bedside and the soft rustle of Evelyn's breath as she dozed lightly in the chair beside him, still clutching his hand. When his fingers twitched, she stirred awake instantly, her eyes finding his. He was weaker than the night before, his breath shallow, but his gaze was clear. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice almost gone. "I told you I would," Evelyn said softly, brushing back the silver hair that had fallen over his forehead. A faint smile flickered across his lips. "I don't deserve you." "You don't," she admitted gently, her eyes glistening. "But love isn't about what we deserve, Richard. It's about what we choose. And I choose to be here." A knock at the door interrupted the fragile peace. Catherine entered, her face taut, but she froze when she saw Evelyn still at his side, hand entwined with his. James lingered in the hallway, arms crossed, his jaw rigid. "Father," Catherine said softly, "the lawyer is waiting. You need to finalize your wishes." Richard's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Evelyn. His grip tightened weakly around Evelyn's hand. "Bring him in." The lawyer stepped in with a briefcase, looking uncomfortable at the tension in the room. Richard's voice was faint but steady. "Write this down. My final will." "Father," James began, but Richard's gaze silenced him. "I leave the estate, the businesses, the wealth, to you both." But his eyes returned to Evelyn, warm and unwavering. "I leave the only thing that matters, my gratitude, my love, and this house's blessing, to Evelyn." Catherine's mouth fell open. James swore under his breath. "Father, you can't." "I can," Richard cut in. "And I have." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded, writing quickly. Evelyn's eyes widened, her head shaking. "Richard, I don't want." "Hush," he whispered, squeezing her hand. "It's not about money. It's about acknowledgement. About setting right what was wrong. You will never again be treated as invisible in this house. Not by me. Not in my name." Tears spilled down Evelyn's face as silence hung heavy in the room. Catherine and James turned away, their pride too wounded to argue further. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Richard's breaths grew shallower. Evelyn refused to leave his side. She wiped his brow, whispered prayers, and hummed an old hymn under her breath, the same one she had sung softly in the kitchens when he used to linger in the doorway, pretending not to listen. He smiled faintly at the sound. "I remember that," he whispered. "You were always listening," she said, her voice breaking. "Always," he breathed. The hours blurred, until finally, the sun sank low, casting golden light across the room. Richard's eyes fluttered open one last time. His hand, frail and trembling, lifted slightly, as though searching. Evelyn caught it, pressing it against her cheek. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice faint but urgent. "Yes, Richard, I'm here," she said, tears streaming freely. He gazed at her with a clarity that pierced through decades of silence. "Say it, one more time." She bent close, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I love you." A single tear slid down his cheek. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "And I love you." His breath left him in a sigh, his chest stilling as peace settled over his face. Evelyn clung to his hand, sobbing quietly, but in her heart she knew he had finally left this world unburdened, free, forgiven, loved. The room filled with silence. Catherine and James stood in the doorway, their expressions unreadable. For the first time, neither hurled insults nor accusations. They watched Evelyn cradle their father's hand to her heart, her grief raw but dignified. Catherine swallowed hard, her voice softer than Evelyn had ever heard it. "He really did love you, didn't he?" Evelyn lifted her gaze, her tears shining but her spine unbroken. "Yes," she said simply. "And I loved him." The words, once unthinkable, now stood in the air like a monument no one could erase. The funeral came days later. The Whitmore estate filled with dignitaries, business partners, and acquaintances in black suits and pearls. Yet when Evelyn entered the room, silence followed her like a shadow. She walked with her head high, not as a maid, not as an outcast, but as someone who had been chosen, seen, acknowledged, and loved. At the graveside, as the coffin was lowered into the earth, Evelyn placed a single ripe peach on top, her hand trembling. The fruit gleamed bright against the dark wood, a symbol of the freedom and sweetness they had once shared. "I'll keep your promise alive," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And I'll remember." Months later, Evelyn sat in her small home, surrounded by the children from her church choir. The garden outside had blossomed, peach trees heavy with fruit. She watched the children laugh, their voices carrying like music through the air, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. She touched the leather-bound journal Richard had left her, its pages filled with his regrets, his confessions, his love. It no longer hurt to open it. Instead, it reminded her that love, even late, even flawed, could change everything. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold, Evelyn whispered into the evening air, "We weren't too late after all." What do you believe? Can love spoken at the very end be just as powerful as love lived for a lifetime? Share your heart in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next extraordinary tale of love, loss, and redemption. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.